How he's doing? First thing first, I've uploaded part 3 of my Occult History of Europe documentaries on the Beyond Room 313 channel. This one you'll find very interesting, about the paradox and anomalies surrounding Aristotle's wheel and what it tells us about the strangeness of space-time realities, and if our ancient ancestors were obsessed with spirals and circles and concentric circles for this reason, and did they learn something we don't know? So I'll put the link to that below. So, not much happening in Ireland today on this epic voyage. The round of resignations from the people involved in the golf thing. But I mean, it's nothing. They'll have 4 or 5 pensions each, and they'll have all the time in the world to play golf. And the only thing they miss about it is the ability to control and have power over others. So it's not like a great victory. It's just to placate the masses, the golden handshakes and everything. But that's how politics is. Now, I've been watching. That's quite disturbing what happened in the United States with that 17-year-old kid with the assault rifle shooting the other 3 protesters. It's not good what's going on in the US right now. It's starting to look like Northern Ireland in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's early days, yeah. Yeah, it was what I could see, it was self-defense to a degree, but he was looking for a reason to kill somebody, it just seems to me. And what's little news has come out, that could be bullshit. He seems to be like a police groupie, and these are usually like, Cartman types from South Park. They're usually social losers. He could just be the type that was destined to be a school shooter, and he had a valid excuse. Now, I'm not defending communists. I dislike communists as much as anyone else, and one of them appears to have had a handgun, but still, when you have an assault rifle and someone hits you with a skateboard, that's cowardice. That's just cowardice. To shoot them in the chest. It's just a summary execution. If there's no, a skateboard. I mean, it also speaks volumes that you're dealing with kids. Kids killing each other over old men's philosophies like communism and race politics. I just think it's a great tragedy that so many young people in America have lost a sense of destiny, that they're out on the streets protesting about things when they should be enjoying their lives, or better still walking away from it. But they've all been brainwashed by their school teachers and radicalized online and things like this, both the left and the right. And, the libertarian America seems as far away as ever when you watch things like that. But it's just a horrible thing. A 17-year-old doesn't need an assault rifle and doesn't need to be walking into crowds looking for trouble. And another 17, 19, 20-year-old doesn't need to be worried about injustices in the past as a method to try and get communism through. It's all insanity. I always reminded that scene in the passage in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, where the idealists from the communes, the Republicans, after their mini revolution fails, they're all lined up against a wall and they're shot by the army, and they're all screaming with tears in their eyes, "Long live the Republic!" And they know they're dying for nothing. They know they're dying for nothing. They'd rather live, but they were caught up in naive young people caught up in moments of madness, and it never changes, does it? So, someone asked me about communism and socialism and stuff like that. Well, to break it down to an easy, understandable thing. Well, it's kind of interesting because communism is not really a political system. If you look at Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, it's a philosophical treatise on economics, and it's more closer to things like Schopenhauer, Kant, and Nietzsche than it is to any kind of hard economic study, like John Smith or something like that. It's nothing like that at all, Adam Smith. It's a philosophical work on on the class system. That's really what it is. It's Das Kapital by Engels. That's the book that really influenced the revolutionary communists. in terms of the Communist Manifesto and the communist system coming in. Now, communism was just basically the state controlling all the means of production. By that meaning, the state sets these forecasts out for what's needed to keep the society healthy, both workers and producers and so on. And so they would develop a system of, it'd be basically public works plus a kind of materialism which work together. So then they would set the contracts on who got what, and and then the contractors. There are companies in communist countries. That's true. They're not necessarily owned by the state. They're dependent completely on the state. So suppose in a communist country, this is the theory anyway. I'm a local commissar, and I go to central government and say, we need a new road between Sligo and Manorhamilton. The old road is no good. And then they'll say, well, come back with the costings of what you need and what you need done. And then they would hire the state architect. The state then would hire an architectural firm and give them the money, and they would then give the construction company the money, and then so on. And that'd be down to everything from building babies' prams, babies' bottles, to the supply of milk. It's all the whole thing is run by the state through kind of, but this is what leaves open to corruption. This is the big problem, another big problem with it. And so that's how that works, and that's where all the bottlenecks come from, because bureaucrats are not very good at getting things done. It's the nature of bureaucracy, because what happens is paperwork mounts and mounts and mounts. Now, that's not to say, and because everyone is working for the state, or being employed by the state, or dependent on the state to do anything, exceptionalism is very rare, because there's not the same reward you get in a capitalist corporate country. Now, that's not to say there isn't exceptionalism in communist countries. Of course there is. So you look at the sports stars. You look at some of the cosmonauts. They were like something out of a comic book. Fellas who were like jet fighters and, artists and, cosmonauts, and they did the mad things in space and stuff like that, and flew jet fighters and were like painters and boxers and stuff like that. Yeah, there was, fascinating characters, but they only excel within the trappings of the state. So they don't excel within the trappings of themselves within a capitalist system. So communism controlled that completely. Now, the only way you can bring in a communist state is by total revolution, and that means the complete dismantling of what was there previously and a total replacement with a People's Republic or whatever, or a Soviet. And this is a difficult thing to do because it involves usually a bloodbath. You have to basically kill everyone else that disagrees with you, because you're always going to have problems with them. So socialism was kind of developed as a way of incorporating elements of that into the state in democracies, in Western democracies. And so you had this concept of free education, which wasn't free, but state education. State healthcare is a classic one. Americans call that socialized medicine. It's a silly state healthcare, where the state is responsible for the healthcare. And it's generally, you don't pay for it up front. And things like that. And a lot of this was as a result of labour unions. Now, if you look at the United States, it kind of showed how to do labour unions properly for a long time. If you've seen that movie, Jimmy Hoffa's movie, about Jimmy Hoffa, the Irishman, that movie, Jimmy Hoffa was an amazing man, really, in many ways. Yeah, he was involved in gangsters and corruption and all this stuff, but everyone in America was then. He was the other Kennedys. And what he achieved in the United States with the Teamsters unions, without using communist philosophy or socialist philosophy, which would have been the preeminent way of doing it in Europe, say, it was remarkable. He raised the standard of living of like truck drivers and things like that. And this cascaded into all other kinds of unions, automotive workers unions. Remember, before he came into power, he had things like the Pinkerton Agency going around with loaded guns in Ford assembly plants. And if anyone tried to start a strike, they'd be taken outside and shot. That's how bad it was in America, and had the kind of control these like capitalists had there, these really bad capitalists had there. And so Jimmy Hoffa had managed to do this all without bringing in a philosophical Marxist idea, which is quite remarkable. And he created a great pension system for the Teamsters. And then the Teamsters, he realized that nothing moved in America without the truck drivers. So you control the trucks, you control America. And therefore he leveraged that power very successfully. And he was loved. He was a hugely loved man. Like all geniuses, he was flawed. But if you look at there's an interview with him on the Dick Cavett show from when he came out of the prison the first time. And he's on the show. And the last thing he is an asshole. He talks there about, he's talking back in the 60s about what they're going to do is move all the factories in the United States over to other countries that where labour is much cheaper and starved and destroy the industry in the United States. He was predicting this 30 years before it happened, before Das Stiegel with the Clintons demolishing the United States production, industry. And so, but in Europe was different. It tended to be labour unions with very philosophical socialist mandates, and you had things like socialism was very central to it, and all European countries had a Labour Party. The Labour Party was generally a socialist party, or was always a socialist party, it was supposed to represent all industrial workers, but towards the end it only represented people who work for the government, and so it became like a kind of a dysfunctional communist thing. But like in Ireland, up until the early 80s, mid-80s, I can remember watching the Labour Party Ard Esh in Dublin, which is what you'd call the National Convention, like the Democratic National Convention in America. And they'd have the cameras then with all these dour union leaders. And at the closing address, they would say, "Long live international socialism," and sing the Internationale. No, that's not the International. The International is and this would be like out and out communism, well, they wouldn't call it communism, they call it Marxism to sort of water it down. And you see that echoed all across Europe, and that kind of fell out of favour around the time the 80s and stuff like that, when, especially in England, when Thatcher allowed people who lived in council houses to buy their own homes, and this freed up a lot of capital among the working class, who then became business people and stuff like that, which is a good thing. And so socialism was really a kind of a way that the communists thought they could dovetail into existing democratic systems in order to eventually bring about the revolution one day. Now, by the 1950s, it was completely clear that none of this was going to work to anyone who was watching. And so you had a situation where you had these intellectuals, who were intellectual Marxists, who decided that with the current mindset and behaviour of the Western people, whether in North America, Canada, US, or in Europeans, you're not going to have a communist revolution. It's not going to happen. Not going to be a workers' revolution. And in groups like the Red Army faction in Germany, and they were just desperate towards the end. In the Brigate Rosse in Italy, they were ending up getting involved in appalling levels of terrorism, particularly the Red Brigade in Italy. And they had the murdering of an Italian prime minister. It was horrible. And they were doing things like shooting off-duty US troops, who'd be like out for a drink at the weekend from NATO bases and wouldn't be bothering anybody, out of uniform. And so, the violence wasn't working. So before that, that was the Red Army faction was trying to, and them groups like the Brigade Rossi and the INLA in Ireland, they tried to use violence to bring in a socialist workers' revolution, whatever. And the IRA were very, very Marxist back then. Very, very Marxist. And that's why when people say the IRA are Catholic organised, they were not. They were not. There were Catholics and Protestants, but a lot of them were atheists. They were driven by communistic ideals, very heavily connected to Cuba. The Palestinian struggle back then was also, quite communistic as well, amazingly, like Black September and things like this. But anyway, that was all. The violence was a result of them not being able to win elections. So the process had already begun with the Frankfurt School and the New School in New York. And the concept was that you would change people. That the Western world was not ready for communism or Marxism in its current guise. So the best thing is to work on the next generation. And that would be to turn up their values upside down, which in the West what they would call Judeo-Christian. This is the term that was used for it. But these values existed probably even before Christianity existed. They're just basic sort of like what you call family values and social values and cultural norms surrounding community and stuff like that. They had to be demolished. And so the things was they brought in things like the sexual revolution. And the pill was central to this. You had I'm not saying it's all bad. It was good things like rock and roll and stuff like that was allowed to flourish through it. Things like the destruction of the family. The welfare system was used specifically for that, particularly with black people in America. In America, black people were not ever going to be communists. They're too intelligent. And so black working class people in America had to be destroyed from within. So they created the welfare system and made a situation where the fathers literally were disenfranchised because they couldn't stay at home. Now, the American people didn't do this. The cultural Marxists working in the Democratic Party did this. And so you had a situation where if a father went back to live with an African-American man went back to live with his wife and kids, or his girlfriend and kids, she would have her welfare cut off. And he couldn't get a job because a lot of the African-American neighborhoods had been very badly damaged by the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So there was a lack of economic and employment. And so it was very difficult. It was easy for a single black man to move around America and, get jobs, like good jobs, like, working as a union in an aerospace company or something, as in construction, or not construction, in manufacturing, in assembly line. There was very good jobs they could do, and a lot of black people, but they were often single black men. If they were married, the situation was designed to destroy the family. And so that was the way, that's how they did it with the black people, in America. They used the welfare system to demolish it. And they did the same too in Europe too as well, with the children's allowance, what they have here in Ireland called the Mickey money, and other things like that. Now, I'm not saying advocating we should go back to poverty, but these things were not altruistically done for the benefit of poor people and working class people. They were done for the benefit of changing them, changing their nature. And so you have third and fourth generations now grow up who are on welfare. So they're already communists. They're already dependent upon the state. They need the state. The simple as that. And they're already communists, by default. And that worked out well for them. And the sexual revolution thing worked out well because it took reproduction and made it into pleasure, into recreation. And so birth rates dropped. Basically, especially among the middle class who are the vanguards of these traditional European or North American values. And so it's been and then things like they got into the arts councils. That's why all the art galleries all around the world are all the same. They all have horrible shite in them, soul-destroying shite. And that's because to destroy your magical and your beautiful vision, and it's all, it's all changed. You had the men, women, genders being crossed over, not for any cultural reason, just purely for political reasons, and all kinds of things like that. And so, so that's cultural Marxism, and it's been extremely successful. It basically runs my country, and Ireland is basically a cultural Marxist Soviet at this point. And most of the Western Europe and huge swathes of North America, not entirely though. You see in certain places, but massively successful. And so that's the main difference between communism, socialism, and cultural Marxism. It may actually at some level, particularly cultural Marxism, be driven by the idea of making life better for people, for all people. But it treats humans like lab rats, and it does not encourage exceptionalism in people. There's people who have like great gifts or charisma. it creates a playing ground. My thing is that still the best system ever devised is capitalism. Now, when I say capitalism, I'm not talking about the junk we have today, corporatism. I'm talking about the classic produce, buy, sell, make capitalism. That's the only thing that has really lifted the poor up. Not even trade unions couldn't do it. That's the only thing that's lifted the poor up to a great degree. In that example I used earlier on was things like Margaret Thatcher allowing people in England to buy their council house, to buy it off the council. And then they had capital that they could leverage to start their own businesses and things like that. And also, like where I grew up in Ballymun, it was the worst ghetto in Dublin. It's all gone now, but I can tell you there were no communists there. I used to see, you'd have all these, every so often you'd have all these socialist workers types coming in, students from Trinity, and sticking up posters on the wall, about Chile and Allende in Chile and how we support the Chilean revolution against Allende. And we didn't even know it. And a picture of a tank, And when I was a kid, very young kid, I joined Na Fianna Éireann, which was the junior branch of the IRA. Communist, though. They were quite communist. And it was a little sort of like Maoist group. Now, I didn't know what they were. I was too young. I was very young, like 9. Two young lads knocked on the door right as they were starting a youth club. And 2 good-looking young lads. And my mother was like, oh, those lovely boys, this kind of thing. And I went down there and in the flats in Ballymun. And it was way better than the Scouts, because they took us up to the mountains and took us to the Isle of Man even, and did amazing things with them. But then you don't notice these pictures of Che Guevara on the wall and stuff like that. And we started doing marching, and had black berets and this thing. And I was only 9 now, and then my old man, God. You didn't buy nothing. Like when you're in the Scouts, you're expected to buy all your own stuff, your uniforms and the books to get your proficiency badges, and they gave you everything. And the trips were all free, up to the mountains in Dublin and to the beach, and that was the first time I was ever on a boat, was with them. And I guess, a sailboat. And they were very well financed. But then my old man found the guidebook they gave me, and it was basically things like, the evils of the West. The Irish Revolution is a communist revolution, is a socialist revolution, blah 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 blah. And there was things in the manual to show you how it was basically military training. And it's funny now thinking back on. They were demolished soon after. My old man said he has to leave. And I left them, was no problem. But they were downgraded a little later because apparently they had become an army by themselves. And they were threatening the IRA, particularly in the south of Ireland. And so the IRA Central Command in Dublin broke them up and put their leaders in. They were becoming an army, and that was the problem. The IRA didn't want an army. They wanted a guerrilla movement. They didn't want a formal army, They didn't want anything particularly overtly Marxist. And so, I was always in a Marxist indoctrination paramilitary group when I was a kid. Completely innocent. It was like one of these stupid things I didn't know what I was doing. And that's why I have sympathy for those Black Lives kids that got shot in America, because, a 9-year-old, a 20-year-old American today would be quite naive. They'd probably have the same level of moxie and common sense that a 10-year-old Irish kid had when I was 10. It's like kids have become more naive in recent times in some ways. They may become more sexually, active and things that we weren't like that. We were innocent that way, even in our teens. But in other ways, they become kind of like green and innocent and primed for things like that. Could be part of the culture of Marxism too. But anyway, so yeah, so that's them things. So that was my flirtation with the International Revolution. I was a 9-year-old member of an IRA offshoot called Na Fianna Éireann, and it was great. I loved every minute of it until my old man read the book properly and says, "You're fucking getting out of that thing." So, now. And, but I didn't know. We weren't given guns or anything like that. And, so that's that. So, look after yourselves and, check out the new video and subscribe to that channel and, love yous all. Bye bye. And I can't find the click. Okay.